My name is James Harrington, and for 3 generations, my family has owned the pristine 50-acre lake that sits at the heart of what is now called Lakeside Estates. My grandfather purchased this land in 1967 for just $12,000. Back then, it was considered worthless swampland far from the city. No one wanted property that flooded during spring rains and attracted mosquitoes in the summer. No one except my grandfather, who saw beyond the challenges to the natural beauty that could be preserved. I grew up spending every summer at our modest cabin by the lake. I can still remember the sound of screen doors slamming as my cousins and I raced down to the water at dawn. The cool morning mist would rise off the lake's surface as we pushed our small fishing boat from the weathered wooden dock. Some of my clearest memories are of my grandfather teaching me to fish in those quiet morning hours, his patient voice explaining how to read the water, how to respect nature, and most importantly, how to be a steward of the land. The cabin itself was nothing special to look at. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen with pine cabinets my grandmother had painted bright yellow, and a living room centered around a stone fireplace where we would dry our clothes after swimming too late into the evening. But it was home in a way my apartment in the city never could be. When my grandfather passed away 10 years ago, he left the property to me with a simple note: "Take care of the lake, and it will take care of you." For years, it remained a peaceful retreat. I would drive out every weekend I could spare, sometimes bringing friends but often coming alone to sit on the dock, watching eagles fish and listening to the wind in the old oak trees. I even started working remotely 3 days a week just to spend more time there. But 5 years ago, everything began to change. The surrounding farmland was purchased by a development company. Within months, bulldozers had cleared the forests, and construction crews were building mansions where corn and soybeans once grew. The single dirt road was paved and widened. Street lights appeared where I used to stargaze. And then came the people. Not families looking for the same peace my grandfather had found, but wealthy executives wanting vacation properties with all the amenities of city living. I watched as one by one, estate homes with 3-car garages and infinity pools replaced the modest cabins and cottages. Within 3 years, my grandfather's cabin was the last original structure standing. I received numerous offers to sell, each one higher than the last, but I always declined. This was not just property to me. It was my heritage. Then came the dreaded homeowners association. Since I had owned my property long before the development, I was technically exempt from many of their rules. This fact clearly bothered Victoria Montgomery, the newly elected HOA president who lived in the largest home on the highest point overlooking the lake. My first encounter with her came on a Saturday morning as I was repairing my dock. "That dock does not meet community standards," she said, not bothering with a greeting. She stood on my shoreline in pressed white linen pants and designer sunglasses, clipboard in hand. "The Architectural Review Committee requires all lakefront structures to be approved before construction or repairs." "Good morning to you too," I replied. "This dock was built by my grandfather in the 70s. It existed before your community standards did." She made a note on her clipboard. "Grandfather clauses can be challenged when structures pose safety or aesthetic concerns to the community. You will be receiving a formal notice." True to her word, the certified letter arrived 3 days later. It contained not only violations regarding my dock, but also my unsightly boat storage, the excessive natural vegetation along my shoreline, and the cabin itself, which was described as decrepit and reducing neighboring property values. But it was the final paragraph that made my blood run cold. The letter stated that according to county records and recent land surveys, Portions of the lake itself were considered common areas under HOA jurisdiction due to original property line discrepancies when the land was first subdivided decades ago. They were claiming ownership rights to my lake, my grandfather's lake, my legacy. The morning after receiving the letter, I called my college friend Michael, who had become a successful real estate attorney in the city. We had stayed close over the years, and he had always offered legal advice whenever I needed it. This time, however, his usual confident tone was replaced with concern when I explained the situation. "James, I hate to say this, but their claim might have some legal merit," Michael said. "In many states, bodies of water have complicated ownership structures. If there were any irregularities when your grandfather purchased the property, or if the deed language is vague about the lake boundaries, they could exploit that." "But my family has maintained the lake for 50 years," I argued. "We have paid the taxes, managed the wildlife, dredged the channels. We have the historical claim." "Historical use matters," Michael agreed, "but so does proper documentation. I need to see the original deed and any surveys that were done. And James, I need to warn you, fighting an HOA with deep pockets can be expensive and ugly." I thanked him and promised to find all the documentation I could. Before hanging up, Michael gave me one more piece of advice. "Attend every HOA meeting, record everything, and do not sign anything they give you, no matter how innocent it seems." The following week, I attended my first HOA meeting at the community clubhouse. I arrived early, taking a seat in the back row of the conference room. One by one, my neighbors filed in, many giving me curious glances. Few had ever spoken to me before. To them, I was just the strange holdout who refused to modernize or sell. Victoria called the meeting to order precisely at 7:00 p.m. She moved efficiently through the agenda items, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. When she reached new business, she nodded to a man in an expensive suit who stood and moved to the front of the room. "For those who do not know me, I am Richard Peterson, head of the Community Development Committee," he said, setting up a laptop connected to a projector. "We are excited to share the future vision for our lakefront amenities." The lights dimmed, and suddenly the wall displayed architectural renderings that made my stomach drop. A massive boathouse with slips for at least 30 vessels, a waterfront clubhouse with floor-to-ceiling windows, swimming platforms, a small beach area with imported sand, all of it positioned along what was unmistakably my shoreline. "As you can see," Peterson continued, gesturing to the images, "the planned marina and resort complex will significantly enhance property values and provide world-class amenities for all residents. Our market research suggests home values could increase by 30 to 40% once completed." I raised my hand, but Victoria ignored me, instead recognizing another board member who asked about construction timelines. Peterson smiled. "We have been working on the legal framework for months. Our team of attorneys has thoroughly researched all property rights issues. We expect to break ground by next spring." I stood up. "Excuse me, that is my property you are planning to build on." Victoria fixed me with a cold stare. "Mr. Harrington, we have strict procedures for addressing the board. If you wish to speak, you need to be on the agenda." "I was not aware you would be discussing building on my land," I replied, feeling dozens of eyes on me. "I think that gives me the right to comment." "The areas in question are not exclusively your property," Peterson interjected smoothly. "Our legal team has determined that portions of the lake and shoreline fall under common area provisions based on the original plat maps from the 1960s. I looked around the room, seeing mostly hostile or indifferent faces. This is theft, plain and simple. That is enough, Mr. Harrington, Victoria said sharply. If you cannot maintain decorum, you will be asked to leave. Now, continuing with our presentation. I remained standing for a moment, then slowly sat down, my mind racing. They had clearly been planning this for months, perhaps years. I was ambushed and unprepared. After the meeting, as people filed out, an older woman I had never spoken to before subtly passed me a folded note as she walked by. Outside in my car, I unfolded it to read. They have bigger plans. Peterson's company is just the front. Meet me tomorrow, 10 a.m. at the coffee shop downtown. Diana Baker, 224 Lakeview Drive. The next morning, Diana Baker, a retired paralegal who had purchased one of the first new homes in the development, confirmed my worst fears. Victoria's husband owns Meridian Development Group. They specialize in luxury resorts. The marina is just phase one. They want to build a hotel, condos, a golf course. They have been buying properties strategically for years. How do you know all this? I asked. I worked for the law firm that handled some of their early acquisitions, she replied. I recognized the pattern when I moved here. Then I started paying attention to who was buying what. They need your lake to make it all work. That evening, I returned home to find my property had been invaded. Along my shoreline, bright orange survey stakes had been driven into the ground at 10-foot intervals, extending well onto what had always been my land. Attached to each stake was a small flag reading, Property Line Survey Lakeside Estates HOA. I pulled one stake from the ground, my hands shaking with anger. This was no longer about petty rules or property values. This was a calculated takeover by wealthy, connected people who saw my family legacy as nothing more than an obstacle to their profits. They had money, lawyers, and connections. All I had was a weathered cabin, a stack of old documents, and a determination not to let my grandfather's legacy be stolen from under me. The next morning, I called my boss at the architectural firm where I worked as a project manager. For the first time in my career, I requested emergency personal leave. Family crisis, I explained briefly. I need 2 weeks. Thankfully, I had accumulated enough vacation time that my request was granted without much question. My first stop was the county records office, a utilitarian building of brown brick and narrow windows. The smell of old paper and dust greeted me as I entered the basement archives where property records were kept. I approached the front desk where an elderly woman with steel-gray hair and reading glasses peered at me over a computer monitor that looked as old as some of the records it tracked. I need to see all records related to Cascade Lake and the surrounding properties, I said, showing my ID. Specifically, the original deed transfers from the 1960s. She studied me for a moment. Cascade Lake. That would be the Harrington property, correct? Part of what they now call Lakeside Estates. Yes, my grandfather was James Harrington Sr. I am James Jr. A flash of recognition crossed her face. Jimmy Harrington's grandson. Well, I am Margaret Willis. I have worked in this office for 45 years. I knew your grandfather when he first bought that property. Everyone thought he was crazy to want that swampland. She shook her head, smiling at the memory. He was a smart man, your grandfather. For the next hour, Margaret helped me navigate the labyrinthine filing system. She pulled original deed books, survey maps, and water rights documentation that I would never have found on my own. We spread them across a large table, the yellowed pages containing the answers I desperately needed. Here it is, Margaret said, pointing to a survey map from 1967. Your grandfather purchased the entire lake bed plus 100 feet of shoreline in all directions from the high water mark. That was standard for water rights in those days. I stared at the document, relief washing over me. So the lake is definitely mine. Margaret frowned, adjusting her glasses. According to this original deed, yes, but there have been amendments to county water rights over the years, and look here. She pulled another file. In 1978, when the first small development was attempted, there was a question about eastern boundary lines. It failed for financing reasons, but the survey discrepancy was never fully resolved. Is that enough for them to claim rights to my shoreline? I asked. By itself, no. But clever lawyers can cause trouble with even the smallest inconsistencies, Margaret said. You know, there should be additional documentation about the water rights specifically. Strange that it is not with these files. She disappeared into the stacks, returning 20 minutes later with a dusty box. These were misfiled, she said, a suspicious edge to her voice. Or perhaps deliberately misplaced. These days, everything is supposed to be digitized, but these never made it into the system. The box contained the original water rights certificate granted to my grandfather, along with mineral rights documentation and correspondence with the State Department of Natural Resources confirming his ownership of not just the surface water, but the lake bed itself. One letter specifically addressed the eastern boundary question, clarifying that the high water mark was the determining factor, not the property lines of adjacent parcels. Margaret, you are a lifesaver, I said, carefully photographing each document with my phone. She lowered her voice. You should know, someone else was in here researching these same records about 8 months ago, a legal team from Capital City. They spent days going through everything, made copies of nearly all the lake documents. That night, I spread everything across my dining room table, creating a timeline of ownership and a map of the surrounding properties. I placed my grandfather's original documents alongside the newer surveys conducted by the HOA. The discrepancies were obvious once I knew what to look for. The HOA survey had conveniently ignored the high watermark boundary definition, instead using property line extensions that cut into the lake itself. The next day, I met with Harold Winters, an attorney specializing in water rights law. His office was modest compared to the sleek downtown firms, but his reputation was stellar. After reviewing my documents for over an hour, he looked up at me with the first hopeful expression I had seen since this ordeal began. Mr. Harrington, grandfather was unusually thorough in documenting his ownership. These water rights certificates and the DNR correspondence establish clear title to the lake itself. The shoreline boundary definition using the high water mark is explicitly stated in multiple documents. Their claim to common area ownership is shaky at best. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, so I have a solid case. You have an excellent foundation, he corrected carefully. But I suspect this is not really about legal technicalities for them. This is about development potential. They want your property and will use every tool at their disposal to pressure you into selling. Over the next few days, I began investigating the HOA board members themselves. I searched property records, business filings, and corporate registrations. What I found confirmed Diana Baker's warnings. 4 of the 7 HOA board members had purchased their properties through different limited liability companies, all of which traced back to shell companies with connections to Meridian Development Group, the company owned by Victoria's husband, Edward Montgomery. The final piece fell into my lap through sheer luck. A misdirected email chain was accidentally sent to all community residents instead of just board members. I almost deleted it until a phrase caught my eye. Once we break ground on Phase 1, property values will force the final holdout to sell. Attached to the email was a comprehensive development plan that made the marina proposal seem minor in comparison. The full vision included a 300-room luxury hotel, 150 lakefront condominiums, a championship golf course, and a retail village, all centered around what they were now calling Montgomery Lake. The projected revenue over 20 years exceeded $2 billion. I sat in stunned silence, staring at my computer screen. This was never about community amenities or property values for existing homeowners. This was a massive commercial development scheme that would transform a quiet residential area into a tourist destination, and it all hinged on gaining control of my lake. My grandfather's legacy was standing in the way of billions of dollars, and they had already decided I would eventually be forced to capitulate. What they did not know was that I had found their paper trail, and I was just getting started. Armed with evidence and a growing understanding of what I was facing, I realized I could not win this battle alone. I needed allies, people with different skills and connections who shared a stake in protecting the community from this massive development scheme. My first step was to contact other original homeowners in the area. These were people who, like me, had owned property before the luxury development began. Most had sold and moved away, but a few remained, often in conflict with the HOA over various regulations. I found 8 families who still lived in older homes scattered around the lake's perimeter. I called each one personally, careful not to reveal too much over the phone. I have information about the HOA's development plans that affects all original property owners, I told them. It is important we meet in person. We gathered in my living room on a rainy Tuesday evening. Tom and Martha Wilson, who had lived in their lakeside cottage for 30 years. Robert Chen, a retired doctor whose family had owned 5 acres on the western shore since the 1970s. The Jenkins family, who operated one of the last working farms adjacent to the development. One by one, they shared stories of HOA harassment, selective enforcement of rules, and increasing pressure to sell their properties. They cited us for our boat dock being the wrong color, Martha Wilson said, shaking her head in disbelief. The dock that has been there for 20 years suddenly needs to be teak instead of treated pine. Our property taxes tripled in 2 years, Robert added. They somehow got our parcel reclassified as luxury lakefront instead of agricultural heritage land. I spread the documents across my coffee table, explaining what I had discovered. This is not random harassment, I said. This is a coordinated strategy to force us all out. Look at this development plan. Each of our properties is marked as a Phase 2 acquisition target with projected purchase dates and maximum buyout figures. The room fell silent as they examined the plans. The scale of the development was staggering, far beyond anything that had been publicly discussed. Their shock turned to anger as they realized how they had been targeted. "So what do we do?" Tom Wilson finally asked. "They have money, lawyers, and half the county officials in their pocket from what I hear." "We build our own team," I replied. "Each of us knows someone with skills or connections that can help. We need to start thinking strategically, just like they have been." Over the next week, our alliance grew. Martha Wilson's niece was an environmental attorney specializing in wetlands protection. She reviewed the development plans and immediately identified multiple potential violations of the Clean Water Act and state environmental regulations. These plans would destroy protected habitats, she explained during our second meeting. The eastern portion of the lake contains documented nesting sites for endangered waterfowl. Any development would require extensive environmental impact studies that I strongly doubt they have conducted properly. Robert Chen had played golf for years with a senior reporter from the regional newspaper. Justin has always been interested in development corruption stories, he said. He broke the story on the West Side development scandal last year. He wants to meet and see what we have. Perhaps our most valuable ally came through the Jenkins family. Their daughter worked for a county commissioner who had expressed private concerns about the pace of development in the region. Commissioner Davis has been looking for solid evidence of improper influence, she told us. He cannot move against powerful developers without documentation. 2 weeks after our first meeting, we gathered in the community center we had rented under the pretense of a family reunion. Nearly 30 people now formed our alliance: original homeowners, environmental experts, concerned neighbors, and even 2 former HOA board members who had resigned in protest over what they called increasingly dictatorial leadership. The atmosphere was charged with energy as we established committees focused on legal strategy, environmental protection, media relations, and local government outreach. For the first time since receiving that HOA letter, I felt hope. The turning point of the meeting came when George Ramirez, a business appraiser and friend of the Chen family, presented his valuation analysis. The room fell completely silent as he displayed his findings on a portable projector. Based on my professional assessment, the lake property as the centerpiece of the proposed resort development would generate approximately $2.4 billion in revenue over a 20-year period, he explained, pointing to detailed financial projections. The lake itself, considering its size, water quality, and strategic location, constitutes roughly 60% of the total development value. Lightning flashed outside the windows as he continued. In simple terms, Mr. Harrington's lake property, which the developer is pressuring him to sell for approximately $5 million, would be worth closer to $1 billion within the context of this development plan. Murmurs spread across the room as people grasped the scale of what we were fighting. This was not just about protecting our homes or preserving natural beauty. This was about preventing a massive transfer of wealth from the community to a small group of well-connected developers. They are not just trying to steal your lake, George concluded. They are trying to steal $1 billion from you. As rain drummed against the windows, we developed our strategy. We would not simply play defense, trying to protect what was ours. We would go on the offensive, using every legal tool available to expose their plans and assert our rights. The HOA and their developer allies had made a critical mistake in believing I would be an easy target, a single homeowner they could pressure or outmaneuver. Instead, they now faced a determined alliance with growing resources, specialized expertise, and most importantly, the moral and legal high ground. As thunder rumbled outside, I felt a strange calm settle over me. My grandfather had taught me that being a steward of the land sometimes meant fighting for it, and that was exactly what we were going to do. Early Monday morning, I walked into the offices of Winters, Chen and Associates, the law firm we had retained to represent our alliance. The reception area was understated but elegant, with framed environmental awards and legal certifications covering one wall. Harold Winters had assembled a team of 3 specialized attorneys who sat waiting for me in the conference room. James, meet Sarah Acaffer, our environmental law specialist, Harold said, gesturing to a serious-looking woman with close-cropped hair. And this is David Menendez, who focuses on HOA disputes and property rights. My partner Lisa Chen will be handling the overall strategy. The polished conference table was soon covered with documents, maps, and legal briefs as we outlined our multi-pronged approach. Large whiteboards filled with timelines and strategy points lined the walls by afternoon. We need to hit them from multiple angles simultaneously, Lisa explained, writing on the whiteboard. First, emergency injunctions against any construction activity based on the disputed property boundaries. Second, environmental protection filings with both state and federal agencies. Third, ethics complaints regarding conflicts of interest among HOA board members. Sarah tapped her pen against a stack of environmental regulations. The wetlands on the eastern shore are protected habitat. Any development would require extensive environmental impact studies and public comment periods. Based on what you have shown us, they have not even begun that process properly. What about the HOA itself? I asked. They seem to operate without any oversight. David nodded. We have reviewed their bylaws and found multiple violations in how decisions have been made. Board members with financial conflicts of interest failed to recuse themselves from votes. Proper notice was not given for meetings where major decisions were made. These procedural violations give us grounds to challenge their authority. By Wednesday, our legal team had filed emergency injunctions against any construction or surveying activity on or near my property. Environmental protection agencies at both the state and federal levels had been notified of potential Clean Water Act violations, triggering mandatory site inspections. The HOA board called an emergency meeting Thursday evening, which I attended with David. Victoria appeared visibly agitated as she called the meeting to order, her usual poise cracking around the edges. We have received legal notices regarding the community improvement plans, she announced, avoiding my gaze. The board is consulting with our attorneys about these frivolous challenges to our rightful development of community amenities. Perhaps the board should explain to the community why 4 board members have financial ties to Meridian Development Group, I said clearly when given a chance to speak. Or why environmental impact studies were never properly conducted for a project of this scale. Murmurs spread through the room as homeowners exchanged confused glances. Many were hearing about the full development plans for the first time. Victoria quickly adjourned the meeting, citing pending legal matters that cannot be discussed in an open forum. The following morning, our media strategy launched. Justin Ferris, the investigative reporter Robert Chen had connected us with, published a front-page article in the regional newspaper. Historic Lake at Center of Development Controversy. HOA officials tied to billion-dollar resort plan. The article detailed the connections between HOA board members and Meridian Development Group, questioned the legality of their claims to my lake property, and highlighted the potential environmental impact of the proposed resort. By noon, local television news vans were parked outside the HOA offices, hoping to catch comments from Victoria or other board members. I watched from my kitchen window as environmental inspectors in official jackets walked the shoreline of my property, taking water samples and documenting the wetland habitats. Their clipboards filled with notes as they photographed the survey stakes that had been placed without my permission. That evening, as I sat on my dock watching the sunset reflect off the contested waters, a black luxury sedan pulled up my gravel driveway. A tall man in an expensive suit emerged, carrying a leather portfolio. "Mr. Harrington," he called out, walking toward the dock. "My name is Alexander Reed, representing Venture Capital Partners. I wonder if I might have a few minutes of your time." I gestured to the second chair on the dock, and he sat down carefully, as if afraid the weathered wood might soil his tailored pants. "I will be direct, Mr. Harrington. My firm has been following the situation with your property and the proposed development. We would like to make you an offer. He opened his portfolio and removed a document, handing it to me. The figure on the page made me blink in surprise. It was 10 times what the HOA had suggested my property was worth. But as I scanned the terms, I realized it was still a fraction of its true value. "That is a very generous offer, Mr. Reed," I said calmly, handing the paper back to him. "But I am not interested in selling at this time." He looked genuinely surprised. "Mr. Harrington, this is substantially above market value for a property of this type. I am authorized to go 10% higher, but that would be our absolute limit." I smiled slightly, thinking of George Ramirez's valuation report. The market value of a 50-acre lake as a private residence is one thing. Its value as the centerpiece of a multi-billion-dollar resort development is quite another. Reed's expression changed, the practiced pleasantness giving way to calculation. "I see you are better informed than we were led to believe. Perhaps we should discuss a different type of arrangement. A partnership, perhaps." "Any discussions about the future of my property would need to include my legal team," I replied, "and would need to address the environmental protection and historical preservation of this lake." As Reed drove away, I felt a strange sense of power. Just weeks ago, I had been ambushed and outmaneuvered by the HOA, feeling helpless against their resources and connections. Now, developers were coming to me with offers. The balance was shifting, but I knew this was just the opening move in what would likely be a complex negotiation. The lake that had been in my family for generations was suddenly viewed as a billion-dollar asset, and for the first time I was being treated accordingly. The legal discovery process proved to be our most powerful weapon. Through court orders, our attorneys gained access to thousands of documents from the HOA, Meridian Development Group, and various county offices. A team of paralegals and volunteer law students worked around the clock, sifting through emails, financial records, meeting minutes, and permit applications. I joined them whenever possible, my dining room table becoming command central for our investigation. One evening, Lisa Chen called me with excitement in her voice. "James, we found something big. Can you come to the office right away?" When I arrived, computer screens illuminated the faces of our legal team as they displayed a complex web of financial transactions. Lisa pointed to a flowchart on the wall. We traced political donations from board members and their spouses to 3 county commissioners and a state senator, all of whom sit on committees overseeing development approvals. Sarah added, "And look at these timestamps. Large donations were made 3 days before key votes on zoning changes that would allow resort development in what was previously classified as residential-only areas." The evidence of influence extended beyond campaign contributions. We uncovered consulting contracts with family members of officials, offshore accounts receiving payments from shell companies, and vacation properties being provided to bureaucrats responsible for permit approvals. "This goes beyond conflict of interest," Harold said gravely. "This is systematic corruption." Perhaps the most shocking discovery came from David, who had been analyzing the corporate structure behind the development plan. "The end buyer is not Meridian," he revealed. "They are just the local front. The actual purchaser would be Luxor International Hotels, a global chain that has been trying to establish a flagship resort in this region for years." 2 days later, our team organized a public county commission hearing. The meeting room was packed beyond capacity, with television cameras positioned in the back. Original homeowners, environmental activists, and concerned citizens filled every seat, with more people standing along the walls. Elderly residents approached the microphone one by one, describing years of harassment and selective enforcement designed to pressure them into selling. They fined me $100 per day because my mailbox was the wrong shade of brown, one woman testified, her voice shaking with anger. Yet board members violated setback requirements when building their own homes with no consequences. Environmental scientists presented detailed reports on the lake ecosystem, identifying protected species and critical habitats that would be destroyed by the proposed development. Maps and satellite images displayed on large screens showed the full extent of the environmental impact. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically when our surprise witness was announced. A young woman walked to the podium, her face partially obscured by a scarf and large sunglasses. When she spoke, her voice was electronically disguised. "I am currently employed by Meridian Development Group in their planning department," she began. "I cannot reveal my identity because I would lose my job and potentially be blacklisted in my industry, but I cannot remain silent about what I have witnessed." She described executive meetings where Victoria's husband Edward Montgomery had laughed about getting lakefront property for pennies on the dollar, and boasted about their political connections, ensuring approvals regardless of public opposition. She confirmed that the full development plan was projected to generate over $2 billion in revenue, with most profits flowing to overseas investors. "The most disturbing part," she continued, "was when Mr. Montgomery instructed us to deliberately hide the environmental impact data showing threatened species in the eastern wetlands. We were told to delete those sections from the reports before submission." The room erupted as she presented internal documents and emails confirming her testimony. Cameras flashed and reporters scribbled notes frantically. Victoria and Edward Montgomery, seated in the front row, whispered urgently to their attorneys. Commissioner Davis, who had been quietly supportive of our investigation, addressed the room when the testimony concluded. "In light of these serious allegations and the evidence presented today, I am requesting an amendment 8 investigation by the State Attorney General's office into potential violations of ethics laws, environmental regulations, and public corruption statutes." The hearing concluded with the announcement that the Chief District Judge had granted our preliminary injunction. All development activities related to the lake property were suspended pending full legal review of ownership claims and environmental impacts. As cameras surrounded Victoria and Edward leaving the hearing, they pushed past reporters without comment, their faces tense with suppressed fury. For the first time since this ordeal began, I allowed myself to feel a moment of cautious hope. The truth was finally coming to light, and the momentum had shifted in our favor. That night, as I sat on my dock watching moonlight reflect off the calm lake surface, I thought about my grandfather and what he would have done in my position. He had purchased this land not for its development potential, but for its natural beauty and the peace it provided. Yet he had also been a practical man who understood the value of leverage and strategic thinking. Whatever happened next, I was determined to honor both aspects of his legacy. In the weeks following the public hearing, the dynamics of the situation changed dramatically. The preliminary injunction had effectively halted the HOA's development plans, and the State Attorney General had launched a formal investigation into the allegations of corruption and environmental violations. Victoria and 2 other board members resigned from the HOA under mounting pressure from homeowners who felt betrayed by the hidden agenda. What I had not anticipated was the wave of legitimate interest in my property that emerged once the true value of the lake became public knowledge. My attorney Harold began receiving calls from development companies, conservation organizations, and even a state parks representative, all interested in discussing the future of the lake. You have options now, James, Harold advised during a strategy meeting in his office. Real options with legitimate parties who understand both the financial and environmental value of your property.